I got elected right out of Harvey. There was a role that the government came in and played, and certainly we were part of that in our office, but that wasn't the first place people looked. People got to work helping their neighbors, cutting down trees, clearing paths, helping put roofs on, doing everything they can. And I think when it comes to, I'm always amazed at how politicians get away with measuring our personal generosity by how much of other people's money we give away, when it's really, we're here to be stewards of it. It's like, it's not my money. I want it. Real generosity is when you give of yourselves. And that's the first place that Texans look. It's what can I do to contribute to this solution, to helping my neighbor. And really for me, like when we look to scripture, I think that's how generosity is really defined.
Many people tend to think that giving is about writing a check. But in Texas, we're reminded that giving starts with showing up, with carrying responsibility, and with serving even when it's hard to do so. In this episode of How Texans Give, my guest is Congressman Michael Cloud, a man who didn't set out chasing Washington, but who chose to go when he felt called to do so. You'll hear why he wasn't eager to go to Washington, just willing to do so. You'll hear what keeps him grounded in a place where everyone seems to want something. And you'll hear why he believes giving can be personal, communal, national, and even global. We recorded this conversation while he was in the middle of a live voting day on the House floor, so you might even hear the buzzers that pull him back into duty. This is my conversation with Congressman Michael Cloud. Representative Cloud, thank you for being here today. It is such an honor to host you. I've visited with you in Israel. I more recently visited with you in Washington, D.C. in your office. I must admit that this really is the first time on the podcast that I feel underdressed.
Well, we do have a dress code requirement for votes on the floor, and I was just on the floor voting a second ago, and we'll be again here in about an hour. I guess when duty calls. All right.
I think that's a great place for us to start, because not everybody shows up in the same way that you've chosen to show up. And I say this in the broadest sense of the term. You're from Texas. You've decided to serve in Congress. You don't just get to decide that. Other people have to decide that for you. They have to put their faith and trust in you. But what makes you decide in the first place to run for Congress and to spend all this time and effort in and on and off the floor, and really committing yourself to that sort of service or giving to the community?
Yeah, really. I was, after school, I worked at a church for quite some time. I loved what I was doing. You're helping people, getting to minister to people every day and see their lives improve. But really felt that while we were doing that the nation was still kind of headed in the wrong direction. And so I felt the need to just get involved in that. And just what that meant for me was locally, volunteering, doing what I could to get people involved in the political process and those kind of things. And didn't expect it to lead to a run for Congress for certain, but eventually some people asked me to run, and I thought that was a crazy idea. And then, my wife and I prayed about it, and, through a series of events, and it felt like we were supposed to run, and we ran and we won. I remember when I was running, I'd always tell people, they would ask, why do you want to go to Washington? And I'd always say, I'm not wanting to go to Washington. I'm willing to go to Washington. Because of the need of where we were in our country, and continue to be. And so it certainly is a great honor, as you said, because people place their trust in you and their hopes that you can come and make a difference. And you want to give what you can to make sure that happens. And so we're giving our best effort. And hopefully the people think we're doing an okay job.
Well, from what I hear, they do. But let me just take a quick step back for a moment. What is that transition like? I mean, serving in these completely different contexts, I would think, at least looking from the outside, that they're completely different. Or are they so different, the serving the community in the church versus serving the community in Congress?
You'd be surprised that there are some similarities. Obviously, Congress is its own beast, and D.C. kind of has its own weird sense of gravity, in a sense, that is not normal. And there's definitely just the functionality of living and working in the space is just different. I remember every time I would get on a plane before, I didn't know anybody on the plane. Now, when I get on the plane every week to come to DC, I usually know 4 or 5 people on the plane. So there's all these like little human quirks that are very interesting, but ultimately it's a people job. And so you're dealing and you're working with people and you're trying to make a difference and move things forward. And then for me, I mean, my faith is what guides a lot of my motivation for being here and just wanting to make a difference. And so in the heart of hearts, it's not all that separate for me. Certainly there's a lot of differences within that as well. Working in a church and working in Congress is definitely different, but at the same time, there's a lot of core issues that overlap.
I want to get to those core issues, but I can't help but be reminded, as you're aware, I live in the city of Ariel in Israel, and the founding father of the city was a man by the name of Ron Nachman of blessed memory. And he and his friends, some of the pastors of some of the churches in the United States, would compare the size of their communities. At the time, Ariel was only a few thousand people, and some of the churches had a larger community than the mayor did, and they would compare what it is like, to be the mayor of a town as opposed to being the pastor of a church. And they would actually find quite a number of similarities, just as you were mentioning before. So I really think that that's interesting. But then at the same time, you talk about the difference, the center of gravity, if you will. What is that like? Obviously we can all conjure up in our minds what DC looks like and feels like, but you're again experiencing this with a different point of reference. Again, if we compare it to the church or other forms of service, what is that center of gravity like, and what are its perhaps more significant challenges as for somebody who wants to give to the community?
Well, I'll just give you one example. When I just got here, I remember talking to a pastor who was trying to do ministry here, and they said it's a very interesting dynamic. And one of the things coming from another community where he was doing ministry here, he said, ambition drives so much, in the sense that from everybody from an intern to the vice president, and that's not speaking specifically to our vice president, but in a sense, someone else's loss is someone else's gain, and some people get driven by the political ladder and trying to climb up, and that becomes kind of their motivation. And sometimes it can start even with a good heart, like, hey, if I had more influence, I could do more good. But then, that can easily become a lie that makes you make a lot of allowances and do things that are not good as well. And so it's just so important to check your heart every day, to stay grounded, to keep people around you who've known you for a long time and can speak into your life, and not let you get a big head while you're up here. Because there's a lot of people. When I just got here, I remember somebody asking me, they're like, how's everybody treating you in Washington? And I told him, I said, well, everybody's treating me just fine so far. The question is why. Are they treating me fine? What do they want, to get done? And so, sometimes the role can feel self-important if you let it, but you have to realize you're just here filling a role for a time, and you got to give your best effort to make it an act of service.
Well, I would love if you could give an example, maybe how you can, I think of what you just described before as the zero-sum game, right? It's either if I win, you lose, if the other way around, then the other way around. And I kind of wonder if it has to be that way. Obviously, the two sides of the aisle right now are not getting along very well. There's been a polarization, and we don't need to kind of imagine what that looks like. We can assume that it's not easy to work together. And obviously, it doesn't mean that each independent side of the aisle is going to get along, everyone amongst themselves as well. But are there ways to create those kind of synergies that, kind of, hey guys, let's just get back to the original principles that we're here for? Is there something that's not quote unquote cynical about DC?
It can be. When I try to explain it, when I go back home, and people are like, why is it so crazy like it is? And the thing that I remind people is, a generation or two ago, and you talked about principles, and I think that's the issue. A generation or two ago, we had shared values that kind of guided the nation. And so the political discussion was, more of how to get to the same place. We have the same goals in a sense for our community, for our nation, and they were built on these founding principles that we all shared. And so the conversation was more of a how to, like, what's the right role of government, the federal, the local, what's the role of the family and all the different institutions in getting to that shared space. But when you enter a conversation on some of these issues where you're probably hearing a buzzer. I don't know if you are, but it's
That's the you got to get to the
it's
floor. To
yeah,
speak every
it's
time.
it's a symbol for what's going on in the house here, but it's okay. Yeah, we'll be fine. But when
I think our audience is gonna love that. I mean, it's just this is live, folks. This is the
yeah,
real
this is the
deal.
real deal.
This is
Yeah,
that center of gravity that we heard about before. It is happening right now. Although this is a pre-recorded episode, yeah, that's what life is like there in DC, and you got to be on your toes. But at the same time, again, just to get back to where you were, if I'm understanding correctly, it's not just the how anymore, but the question is, are we even headed in the same direction?
right. When the goal is different, and sometimes the conversation, and this isn't for everyone on a particular side of the aisle, but sometimes the conversation is America a good force or an evil force in the world? When you're having some of these very, very core issues where, we're talking about foundational principles that now we have a great disparity between what is good and what is evil. It becomes hard to find common ground on some of those issues, and I would say even sometimes rightfully so. The goal shouldn't be right or left, red or blue. It should be what's truth, and we should be doing our best to get as close as we can to that as it's revealed to us with the information we have, and make the best decisions along those lines. So we've seen erosion of some of the founding principles, and I think that's led to some of it. Now, that's not to say, that you can some of the local issues, farming and infrastructure and those kind of things, you can still do what you can to try to find whatever common ground it remains and move things forward as best as we can. But this is also why I think in this season it's important to have a revival of just really the founding principles of this nation, and for all its imperfections, really how special the United States of America is and how much good has been brought into the world. And we can continue to work toward a more perfect union, but we need to return those core values, and that'll help restore kind of a more unified front up here.
I actually want to touch upon what you just mentioned, which is the farming and the issues that you're working for to support your community where you come from. You go to DC to support Texas, but then there's also the global. So before we get there, I just want to, if I may, share something that, for what it's worth, I mean, someone who doesn't live in the United States, although I was born and raised in the United States, now I live in Israel, and it is clear to the people around the world that what the United States does matters. It sets a tone. And we're not going to go now into political analysis of what administrations kind of set what tone for the rest of the world and what bad actors in the rest of the world maybe are taking advantage when the United States is either more or less engaged. And we're not going to go into analysis of America first or otherwise. I'm just pointing out simply, and this is just something that I think the average American voter doesn't understand or appreciate and may be not of interest to them. But this world is a global village, and things are interconnected. And the approach that the United States has to the rest of the world, everyone is watching. And that is that contributor in potential that the United States can be. Again, nothing's perfect. But I think the posture that we have, the orientation that we have is, are we here to contribute beyond ourselves? Just like on the microcosm of the individual, what's true for a person is true for a community, it's true for a country, it is true for the world. And so I don't want to get on my soapbox. This is really me listening to you. But for what it's worth, I do think that contribution to society, again, the global society, is something that the United States has an important role in. Again, we'll see where things are going. I want to then just indeed take that step back into where we were with your constituents, right? So you come to D.C. to represent communities in Texas, and when I was in the office, you showed me the map of your district. But I do want to point out that this particular conversation was important for me to invite you on now because we're in the middle of a series called How Texans Give. So within this context of you are what you give, we've got this mini series on how Texans give and why Texans. We could do a series about how anyone gives anywhere, because giving, I think, is just part of the human condition. But there are certain cultures or frameworks, if you will, cultural frameworks, where people might give in a certain way. And we've had everyone from ranchers to people running foundations and relief works and all kinds of things with that kind of special Texas flavor. So maybe bring us into your district for a minute and give us a sense of who it is that you're representing and what are the kind of most important points that you can support representing your community when you go to DC.
Sure. The vast majority of our district's very rural. And then we also have Corpus Christi in our district, which has the largest energy export port in the country. And so, from the standpoint of energy dominance and us helping our allies and, how strong how important an energy portfolio is to having a strong nation, we get to be wrapped up all in those issues. And it's exciting because it is a key national issue. And while it's a local issue, it's also a national priority. And again, you mentioned the influence around the world. I've been around the world and been on the other side of the world, and they say we're getting our LNG, for example, from your city across the world. And it's exciting to be involved in that. But then we're also dealing with, families and communities all over just trying to make life work. We have a lot of farming and ranching in our community as well, and a number of industries that support all those activities from energy development to farming and ag and everything in between. So, staying involved and interacting with the people in the community it's really what keeps you motivated in this role, remembering that you're representing real people and they're kind of not putting all their hopes for life. I'm not trying to oversell, our importance, certainly God and faith, and those things are more important in their day-to-day lives. But we do want to steward the trust that's been placed in us and make sure that we're representing them well in the issues that affect the district, even as we address the national issues.
Sometimes I like to think about the audience of one, right? If you were stepping into your office and waking up in the morning and you've got to go again voting on the floor, mm-hmm. and the conversations you have to have with people who you're not sure if they really want to be your friend or they want something out of you, all of that, you're representing somebody, mm-hmm. and you've mentioned a whole range of somebodies. Can you give me an example of a person, an individual, or a case, a constituent, something that kind of motivates you when you wake up in the morning and say, I'm here representing this person?
There's so many of those. It's hard to nail it down to one. But, I remember a veteran coming up to me after an event, had served in a couple wars and, still moving, but, getting up in age and asking me if he could, help out with the campaign in a very little effort. But it was just like, you feel like these people are given so much and you want to be involved or I remember us being able to get some medals and place it on the grandchild of a veteran who didn't get their medals that they had earned back at a different time in our country, and see the tears coming down and the honor being restored to that family. It's just amazing. But then you have, again, the farmer, the rancher out in the field trying to make everything work together, even in a drought, and provide for their family and leave a legacy and keep things going. And so there's all these human stories that, yes, there's policy issues involved with it, but you're connected to the people and the people that you're representing and their stories and wanting to put the right policy in place that makes lives better.
When we started this little How Texans Give series, we started with two women who I refer to as the Lone Star Ladies. They're ranchers, they're business women, and they're actually not far from your district. They're a little farther west and north, respectively, but they're living the experiences that you're referring to right now. And there's something also about that generational transition, or also, on the one hand, kind of getting with the times and figuring out how everything from data centers that are coming to the area to making sure that people can get higher education that perhaps previous generations couldn't, and at the same time, maintaining that, I'm calling it a Texas flavor, or the same value system that they've had until this point in time. And I kind of, first of all, that story about the veteran and was it the grandchild?
Yes, yeah.
So that whole generational shift, but not shift, excuse me, that generational transition and bringing things from one generation to the next and honoring the generations that came previously so that you can sow into the generations that will come. I think that was a theme that certainly came to the fore in those conversations as well. To me, this kind of begs the question, this concept of explorations of giving. What does it mean to give? And in this case, we're talking a lot about service to the community. And there's that bridge that you mentioned. There's the national priority, and then there's the people, the day-to-day people.
Right.
Where is there opportunity to kind of maybe remind ourselves, and I say this for everyone, you're in Congress, but how can we always be reminded, keep kind of front and center, the humanity of the issues? It's not just the numbers and the stats and the global issues, it's the people. How do we keep that front and center?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you mentioned like the Texas spirit, and that's one thing that I love about Texas. I really think of it as kind of founding revolutionary era spirit of America that's kind of just still going strong in Texas, if I could say so. But I think like, I got elected right out of Harvey, and watching how our people in South Texas dealt with Harvey. There was a role that the government came in and played, and certainly we were part of that in our office, but that wasn't the first place people looked. People got to work helping their neighbors, cutting down trees, clearing paths, helping put roofs on, doing everything they can. And I think when it comes to, I'm always amazed at how politicians get away with measuring our personal generosity by how much of other people's money we give away, when it's really, we're here to be stewards of it. It's like, it's not my money. I'm just a steward of public trust, and we certainly want to do. Real generosity is when you give of yourselves, and that's the first place that Texans look. It's what can I do to contribute to this solution, to helping my neighbor, and really for me, like when we look to Scripture, I think that's how generosity is really defined. And so, we have a role in government with some things, but the fact that, it's that founding principle of a free society and a republic where we have liberties, but that comes with personal responsibility, hand in hand. And I think you find that in Texas.
Yeah, well, that's pretty amazing, actually, what you're referring to with Harvey. And I recently did a tour, a bit of a road trip through Texas, and had an opportunity also to interview some people for the podcast, and also visit Kerrville and see how people were still working to support the aftermath of the devastation of July 4th. And it's 100% everything that you're describing right now, and people just giving of themselves. I actually think it's pretty amazing, that kind of attempt that I'm having to figure out what is that Texas flavor. Can you put your finger on it? And I think that the straight shooting, the responsibility, that community element where people are just pitching in. And I don't think that communities pitching in are unique to Texas. I certainly wouldn't want it to feel that way or seem that way. And I wouldn't want to judge others, but we can say that in Texas, what you're seeing, what I'd seen during those travels, is that they're just showing up, and they're not, as you said, waiting for the government to do that for them. That other point that you made also about, it's not your money. I'm actually right now witnessing, just with some of the work that I do, these kind of two nonprofits that are partnering together, and one nonprofit is raising capital, and the other nonprofit is partnered with it to deploy that capital. And sometimes the two nonprofits kind of get into a little bit of an argument. Is it my money or your money? And I keep telling them, folks, it's not your money and it's not your money. It's either the beneficiary's money or it's the benefactor's money, right? But you guys are stewards.
Right.
You guys, I call them impact agents, right? You're here to do a job. You're here to serve and make sure that this money is well spent. It's allocated according to the intentions, the mission statement, the values, and the agreement with the benefactor.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's not yours. And so that place of stepping into that kind of responsibility and understanding that you are here to serve, I think is a great message. It's something that not only Congress people, but all of us need to be reminded of. And then I want to kind of circle back, though, because you mentioned faith. And this is kind of also our conversation started there. We started with maybe a transition from the church context to Congress, but then we talked a little bit about how there's some parallels. Is it easy or more difficult to keep faith front and center when you're serving in Congress?
That's a good question. I think if you came here and you weren't rooted, you could certainly be distracted from the daily habits that keep a strong faith. There's no doubt about it. But I find day to day that more it reminds me of my great need for staying connected with God and taking time to read the scriptures and doing all the habits of having a strong faith. And it's a daily thing you have to do to stay guided by that. But to me, that's how you find peace in the chaos. And so just on a personal level, that's important to kind of keeping perspective and remembering why you're here, that it's not all about you, that you're here to serve, all those key components, for me are rooted in faith. And so I find that every day reminds me of the great need for it.
Yeah, no, it's like when you're in those more challenging contexts, oftentimes it is a great reminder,
Yeah.
right? It's kind of 1 second, that's your reality check. And what is your center of gravity, as you referred to before? You also mentioned something about being, surrounding yourself with the right people, the people who are going to keep you maybe connected and rooted. Can you give me an example of someone who kind of helps you do that?
Well, certainly, I think for anyone who's been in a long-term marriage, my wife and I met in high school, and certainly she's a big part of that for sure.
Wow. How many years of marriage, if I may ask?
Oh gosh, we got married in 1999. So what year? 26. So this will be 27 years in August. But we met 7 years before that. So it's been a road, and certainly she speaks into my life. But then I have friends who are around me and close to me that I've known for 30 years, and are still in my life. And I'm not the congressman when we hang out. It's just Mike, and so they remind you that you're a human, and
You get to take off the jacket and tie.
Yeah, exactly.
And, sit down and maybe hang out over the weekend. You watch football? Are you a sports guy?
Well, occasionally. I mean, we, with our schedules, we don't get a whole lot of time to do it. I did watch the Texans game this week with, it was a Monday night, and so my son was on the other end of the phone as we watched it together. But, so we, occasionally, try to sneak in a game every now and then. But, yeah, a lot of times it's just finding time to go to lunch or communicate, or have a game night with our couples or something. Meet at church or whatever.
Be human, be real. Yeah, no, I don't know if everyone knows this, but I'm told that, and I've been to Texas quite a number of times. There are two state religions in Texas: football and Christianity, in that order. And so when we talk about faith, we got to be. We got to be focused on which of those we're referring to. But of course, I jest, and obviously everything in its proper perspective. But there is that enthusiasm, and we would be remiss not to mention the kind of Texan pride that you've got those huge flags on the sides of the highways. I'm sure it's in your district as well. It's something that I've not seen elsewhere in the United States, where you've got oftentimes just a huge American flag flying, and right next to it, a Lone Star State flag. And first of all, they look great together. I mean, they obviously match, and it gives you that strong sense of patriotism. But I don't even know how big those flags are. Oftentimes, those car dealerships along the highways will have these huge flags towering over, and it says something. It sends a message about that kind of, again, pride and that connection to those same, I think more than anything, the values that keep Texans running. I do have a question, though. Do you see I mentioned the data centers before, and this has been in some of the other conversations that I've had.
Mhm.
Are things changing as America
Mm.
changes, or as America becomes maybe a little bit more divided? At least where you're hanging out in DC. When you go back to Texas, do you see anything changing, or is it really, or is the same culture that I guess you grew up in, is that alive and well?
Yeah, yes, and yes, in a sense, things are changing, and then there's still those principles there. With the advent, you mentioned data centers and AI and advanced robotics and all these things that are coming up with us certainly in this next generation. I remember going to a conference and hearing someone speak, and they were just talking about my generation. They were saying we are the last generation that remembers what things were like pre-digital, and just being able to separate the digital world from reality is going to be something that this next generation really has to, it could be a challenge for this next generation, especially, advancement of AI and data and all the digital screens. And, I remember when having one screen was amazing. I had a computer that had two screens, and back then it was like, whoa. And now people, you get your iPad and your iPhone and your iPhone, and you're on five different, you're always looking at a screen somewhere. And just being able to stay rooted and grounded to what's real and real people and real relationships, which is really supposed to be the core motivation for service. I think it's going to be important, but will certainly be a challenge for the next generation. But there's some bright spots there too, as you see some of the values and some of the things that they've had to live through COVID, and anyway, they it's just to find them in a way where they're seeing some of these, what we would, look at as age old principles and traditions and values that are kind of, you see flickering once again in the younger generation. So I think there's hope on the horizon still, but certainly there will be challenges as we move forward.
Yes, and I can only imagine that the cognizance, the awareness of the fact that it's a challenge, and what we said before, that orientation towards what are the generations going to look like going forward, that same sense of responsibility that we're contributing to. And I do love, just to refer to way back when the conversation about righteousness and giving begins with God and Abraham.
Mhm.
And he says, I need to tell Abraham when I'm going to do something horrific in the case of destroying the communities
Mhm.
of Sodom and Gomorrah, because he's going to teach his generations after him to do righteousness and justice. In other words, it's the long game.
Yeah.
And so just thinking about that, I think it's part of the conversation about giving. With that, I
Yeah.
just want to, I'm cognizant of the fact that you've got to hit the floor soon enough, but I do want to just ask the one question in closing. As you think about the themes that we're talking about in giving and service, and this arc that you've had going from the church framework through Congress and kind of back again, always grounding yourself in community and real people, what does the title that we use for the podcast, "You Are What You Give," what does that mean to you?
That's so good. You mentioned Abraham, and I think back to Abraham. God said, "Hey, we're going to bless. I'm going to bless you, Abraham." But it didn't stop there. It was, "I'm going to bless you so that you can be a blessing to others." And I think
Blessing to all the families of the earth. Yeah, all the families of the earth shall be blessed through you. That's quite a tall list.
Right. But I think that's the perspective we need to have. When we think of living in a prosperous country and those kind of things, it's blessed to be a blessing. And giving and having a heart for giving is really what helps us to leave a legacy. And I think we almost have to define what giving means, because, especially I mentioned, how politicians get away with kind of saying our personal generosity is giving away other people's money. I remember David in scripture saying, "I won't give to God something that costs me nothing." And so just the understanding that giving is actually personal sacrifice is connected with that, and how important that is in that was a deeply rooted American ethic. And sometimes that's finances, sometimes it's time, giving of relationships, just the many different ways we can be thinking of the people around us and sacrificing in order to help make their lives better. But especially in a role like this, one of the things that I've tried to remember was a story I heard a long time ago, just understanding the difference of prominence and significance. And I think living a life of giving is what helps you have a life of significance. And the whole question of like, you could ask somebody, who won the Super Bowl 10 years ago, or who won an Oscar 10 years ago. And maybe somebody who's really tracking that might be able to remember. Most people won't remember even who the president was, 30 presidents ago or what have you. Very prominent people. But if you ask somebody, hey, who's a teacher that made a difference in your life, or, who's somebody who helped you through a tough time, so even as we're dealing with, all the cameras being around us and everything that we're dealing with from a legislative standpoint and the environment that's up here and, so much attention on this city, just remembering to be human in it all. And that what you want is for the people you actually come in contact with to at the, end of time to have made an impact in their lives.
Wow. That's actually really, really powerful. I think that's a critical insight. We really are here not for our own reputations. It's really, we're here to contribute something. You are what you give really is about that perspective. How are we going to be measured after we pass on? Or how do we want to measure our lives as we build our lifetime value day in, day out? I think that's even a healthier way of looking at it. And so 100%, I also love what you said about the sacrifice, the need to give means to give of yourself, something that you should feel it. It should be meaningful to you because you're giving it beyond yourself, and giving means taking something that currently within your domain and contributing it elsewhere. So I think those are some critical points. I just want to add one little slight, because we spoke about Abraham, one slight little additional point. You may recall when we met in Israel, we had a little bit of a discussion with a number of congresspeople, and I had the opportunity to mention that those verses about Abraham being blessed and what it means to be a blessing. And we spoke about how in the Hebrew, the term blessing is actually basically means abundance. What does blessing mean? And I don't want to analyze it right now, but it means abundance. It's an abundance mindset.
Right.
It's, yes, I'm going to sacrifice of myself, but I'm actually not going to lose anything in that process. More is more, not more is less. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not me or you.
Right.
We can both win in this thing. And I guess maybe that gets back to what you started with also, which is as long as we know where we're headed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly what makes life better if everybody would live that way, right?
Yeah, think about the net gain for humanity, right? If everybody were giving, so, give more than you take, right? If everyone gives a little bit more than what they're taking, so we're all going to win.
Exactly.
Well, Representative Cloud, thank you so much for your time in the middle of a busy day. And next time we have a conversation, a rain check, I'm going to have to bring, if not a tie, then at least a jacket. So hold me to that one. Okay.
I'll be happy to take mine off.
Well, yeah, maybe we'll meet over a weekend and watch a game. That's also a possibility. But thank you so much for your time. And this is also a form of giving. So we really, really appreciate it. Also, please thank the staff for making this happen. It's not easy to get your schedule together. So I do appreciate the team and everyone who's been involved in this, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks so much. God bless you.
God bless. Before we close, I want to thank Congressman Cloud, not just for his time, but for his openness in the middle of a packed day on Capitol Hill. One of the lines that stayed with me was this distinction between prominence and significance. Prominence is about being seen. Significance is when we see beyond ourselves. Congressman Cloud reminded us that giving demands sacrifice. It should cost you something, your time, attention, comfort, because it's an act of service. And with that, this week's Giving Challenge. This week, choose an act of willingness. Not the thing you want to do, the thing you're willing to do because it's needed. It might look like showing up for someone when it's inconvenient, taking responsibility for a task that no one else wants to do, checking in on a neighbor instead of just scrolling past, making space for a real conversation when you're tired, or just doing one quiet act of service with no credit attached. Consider this giving challenge your friendly nudge to do what you're willing to do for someone else. And as we close, I do want to thank Victoria Hurst, whose generosity and belief in this project continue to make You Are What You Give possible. And thanks to you, our growing community, for tuning into You Are What You Give and to our series of How Texans Give. See y'all next time. Thanks for listening. If this conversation resonates, please subscribe. It's a simple step that helps us share the word and build a community that values what we give more than what we take.